Welcome to Shut Up and Sit. I'm Yedda Stansel, a consciousness coach and consultant. I'm on a mission to bring mindfulness to the modern world. Each week, we will offer ancient healing practices, real-world examples, and the latest research in neurobiology and behavior change into fun conversation that invites you to wake up your highest self. Now, let's go shut up and sit. Welcome. I'm so glad to be back here with you today. Welcome to the Shut Up and Sit podcast. I'm Yedda, and as always, you've heard me say it. I'm going to keep saying it every episode. I'm so excited to be back and to be talking with you all today. Today, you've still just got me. We're still kind of in the meat of the middle of all of this work that we're putting out in the world with the book, Shut Up and Sit, which is just really radical teaching on how to break free from limiting beliefs that could be holding you back and are holding you back from living the life that you've always dreamed of. And so we've got just a few more episodes of just kind of really, we're at like the epicenter of all of it, which is deep into chapter 4 on beliefs, the biology of belief. Last episode, we really spent some time talking about the 4 ways to change a belief. And as I'm talking to you, I'm kind of looking at where we are in the book. And I mean, this is not, I'm not saying this because it's me saying this. This is life-changing stuff, and I do this all the time with clients and groups and one-on-one settings and workshops and lectures. You know, the whole purpose of putting a book together and a manual with you, if you will, is, and I'm kind of getting away from the word like process or method, because it's not my process, it's not my method. It's all of the tools that I started researching, as you've heard along the way, out there on what is a belief? How do beliefs work? If where I'm at's not serving me and I want to have a belief, and back in the day, I didn't say words like, I'd like to change my belief system. I just didn't know why. I was in the question, why do other people get there and I'm not? What am I doing or not doing that is causing me to or not to get to where other people are going in their life? And so this whole work is just, it's such a blessing for me. I'm literally sitting down and shutting up and sitting down today to talk to you at the mindfulness bar like I do every episode. And today has just been like a whirlwind leading up to even getting here to sit in this seat. And when I say that, I mean, literally every time in between episodes, of course, life is going on and I'm working with clients and I'm living and laughing and loving and all kinds of stuff in between episodes. And so you get little snippets and you get me talking about the work and you hear a little bit about my story. But before we jump in today and we kind of wrap up almost at the end of chapter 4, which today we're talking about the 4 choices that matter. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. But I want to say something to those of you listening today, because this has kind of just been really on my heart and mind. And I love how the universe works. I love how the divine intelligence of existence works. You might say, oh, those are big, really wordy intellectual words, Yedda. Well, they are, but they give me space and freedom to get out of any conditioned dogma or belief system around religion. So when I say God, I mean universe. And when I say universe, what that means to me is something I cannot comprehend. If I get into the dogma and the belief system around God, what can happen is I can fall into some of the patterns and belief systems of making that a very humanistic experience. And it can be very riddled with guilt and a lot of expectations and a lot of ego. And so I'm not talking about the dogmatic kind of pragmatic point of religion, but the universe, the way the magic of all the unknown works to me is fascinating. And as I'm sitting here with you today, I'm literally coming off of several conversations in the past 24 hours that weren't pre-designed by me. They certainly weren't things that I said, hey, I want people to come and talk to me about their belief systems. But I want to share as we get into this episode today, really literally the power of belief systems. And I had an incredible gift yesterday. And actually, we're filming this episode right now and going into this, and this is actually going to be used as a video also in our lesson on our online course. But as I'm filming this with you all, we're coming right off of Father's Day, which was on Sunday, and it's Wednesday. So, I didn't get to see my father who raised me, I call him Dad, on Father's Day. It didn't work out, and so I ended up seeing him yesterday. And what was really interesting was yesterday we spent the day together. My dad's always great about coming over and helping me with stuff around the house. And he came down here to the studio and helped me with some stuff that needed to be fixed. And, just a handyman, but, really cares and really takes great care when he does do work for people. And so we spent a couple hours together yesterday, and just at my house doing some repair works, and replacing light bulbs and air filters and stuff like that. And so we came down to the studio. Well, when we left, we chit-chatted a little bit. I gave him a card and gave him a hug, told him I loved him, and he went home. And then when I was later in the afternoon, I looked at my phone and my dad had sent me a text. And it was so profound because it was a picture of me 31 years ago. And then there was an image of a handwritten letter I had written to my dad 31 years ago, exactly to the day from yesterday. And he said how proud he was of me. And he goes, 31 years ago today, I'm so proud of what you've done and where you've become in your life. And it was just a really thoughtful note. But I looked at this young girl from 31 years ago, and I looked at this handwritten note, and then literally I put it on social media. You guys can check it out. But in the handwritten note, I promised to never, ever let him down again. Because the picture was me in Bonaire Home for Girls. And if you don't live here in Richmond, Virginia, basically it's a juvenile lockup center. Okay, so I had just turned 18. I had been arrested for multiple charges and had already been in and out of drug rehab once. And I was a hot mess. And it was not a good situation. And it was literally, so we're in the month of June, it was 31 years ago. And when my classmates were going to walk across the stage to graduate high school, I was in Bonaire Home for Girls. And it was right around Father's Day, right around high school graduation. I had written this note to my dad. And literally, so I want to share that because when we talk about the power of beliefs, and as I'm sitting here literally in downtown Richmond, life's going on all around me as I'm talking to you, I didn't know back then. I would have never used the word belief. I have a belief that's holding me back. I did not know. I had no idea. All I knew was everyone else is making it. They're walking across the stage, graduating. They're going out and they're going to create a life and have a career and get jobs and get married. They're going to do all the things that I thought you were supposed to do that defined success. And I just wanted to really start today's show to say, when I looked at that picture yesterday and I connected back to that young girl 31 years ago, hope wasn't even a word. I didn't have hope. I didn't have dreams. I didn't have even the mindset to say, oh, well, you just got to buy a book Yedda and listen to a podcast. And you just got to do these things to get the life you wanted. I was in such a hole of deep, dark, desperate despair and dysfunction and brokenness that those words didn't even exist for me. And when I looked at that picture yesterday and I read his note, and I thought, oh man, that was 31 years ago. That I literally, and I put this on social media and I said, nobody would have bet on me. Nobody. If anybody had been in that moment in time and seen me and seen where all of my classmates and everyone that I knew was headed, I was literally incarcerated and there was no possibility of a future for me. And so when I listened and kind of, sat with that picture and looked at myself and I thought, gosh, where was she? And how did she get from there to here 31 years later? And what I want to share with you is, yes, I did do my work, and yes, all of the work I'm teaching you is compilations of years and years of learning and figuring out how to do that. One by one, I did unravel and all of those limiting beliefs that were holding me back. But the most important part that came to me yesterday was the healing is happening simply because we just show up. It's happening. There is something else inside of us that gets us up, that moves us towards the next thing and the next thing. Mindfulness came into my awareness almost 10 years ago as a conscious effort to expand the window of awareness to see more and do more for myself, but also for other people. But what I realized looking at that picture yesterday was it was always there. Always. And what makes me think about that is, what I mean and where I'm going with that with the talk today is, think about if you cut your arm, and I've mentioned this before, but our body has an innate intelligence. It has a wisdom. So you don't have to consciously think about all the red and white blood cells and all these other things that are happening in your body and your immune system to force and to pay attention to have that wound heal. And so here's what I really, really want to bring up and make as a point for you all listening today. Healing is happening. It's already happening. The belief systems that you hold, the wisdom that's inside of you, that unknown magic, those serendipitous moments, the people that cross your paths, whatever you want to call that, it's already happening. So that's what I mean by we show up and we do things to make that, I don't want to say happen, but to inspire the healing to continue to grow. But the wounding and the healing of the wounding, it's already happening. It's already happening right now inside of you. The question is, do you want to go a little bit deeper? Do you want to pull a few more layers back? Where do you want this healing to take you? And I say healing because I want you to think about a wound. And healing sometimes evokes like we've got to do something. But there is, if you think about, and if you really knew of the trillions of cells in your human body right now, what's happening at a cellular level inside of your body that you are not forcing to happen, but there's a divine intelligence, a magic of life that is making that happen, it would blow your mind. So what I want you to think about is, yes, we make choices to wake up, to show up, to identify limiting beliefs, to rewind, rewrite, rewire them. But we also hold space that there is a magic, there is an unknown, there is something else going on, and it's always at play. So it's not like, oh, I put my book down, or I didn't listen to the episode, or that's called guilt, and that's your ego, and that's your mindset. And the other reason I bring that story up from yesterday is, I'm also, I'm hearing from a lot of the folks that are doing this work, this can get a little seductive. We get in here and we're like, ooh, so I've got this one belief, it's holding me back. And then somebody will call me and say, okay, well, if I figured out if I'm not enough, then I realize there's probably this one and this one. I want to work on those too. And I'm like, whoa, slow your roll. Healing is happening. Mindfulness isn't. Now I'm going to become an egomaniac expert at the healing process. So I want to kind of balance that out for you all because we are really deep in the meat of this work right now. Be easy about it. Take a breath. I was telling somebody yesterday, I'm like, hey, you've identified one limiting belief. You've been working on it for about 2 weeks. We're not going to identify 3 more and throw that in the mix. That's going to actually set you up to trigger an old story and trigger a limiting belief that's actually going to make you to actually not do the work. So there's a pace and there's a speed to this work. And what I love about mindfulness is we're cultivating the ability to create some space in our inner mind and in our outer world. And so today I'm gonna talk to you about one of my favorite techniques of mindfulness, which is loving kindness, and kind of how to do a loving kindness meditation, if you will, to give to yourself the kindness and also to others loving kindness. And so just want you to know, just be easy about this. Okay, this is deep work. It's not going anywhere. Hopefully you're not going anywhere anytime soon. So it's exciting. It can be seductive to want to take it all in and then get really excited you can get free. But our ego can get tricked into wanting to obsess about getting attached to the freedom. And there's lots of ways to dig into this, but I wanted to say that. And as I looked at that picture, and it was really interesting, and my mindfulness practice has now cultivated, I know when I'm having a thought or when a thought actually comes from the silent, still space or the gap between the thoughts. And I could feel, this thought comes to, and I say it comes to me, and I'm like, oh. And so it's almost surprising when you tap into your own wisdom, because instead of being constantly in the churn of all the things you're thinking, as we sit and cultivate mindfulness, as we shut up and sit, that space, that gap between the thoughts, it starts to widen a little bit, and you'll be surprised at the inspiration that comes to you. And to me, I always get surprised. I always kind of want to look over my shoulder and be like, what? You want me to do what? Like it's not a voice that's talking to me. It's just this knowingness of an idea that doesn't come from my own mind and my own ego. For me, it comes from my spirit, from my soul. And so when I was looking at that picture and reading that yesterday, I got that knowingness that said, you need to share this. And the truth is, in my professional world, in the business world, I don't talk about the fact that I have a GED. Yes, it's in the book. You hear way more on this show, that I promise you, than the general public or the clients or the business world know about me. Because I put all of that away and I thought, we're not going back to her. Nobody wants her. They want this version of Yedda that's really smart, that knows a lot of information, that's poised, polished, professional, walks in the room. And what I've found as I've gone through this work is, and I think the picture was so powerful. And isn't that funny? My dad just happened to go home, happened to look through some old photos and found the picture and the note. Literally, I took a picture of it. It was dated, yesterday's date, 31 years ago. And when stuff like that happens, you can call that magic, you can call that divinity, you can call whatever dignity, whatever words you want to use about the way the universe works. I don't question it anymore. I just go, oh, thank you very much. What an incredible gift. And I just heard you need to share that. And I didn't question it now. When I hear those knowingness now, I'm like, okay, I know now if I follow it, it takes me to a far better place than my ego does. And so I put it on social media. And it was amazing how quickly it started blowing up. All of my friends from high school were making comments. We had no idea. A lot of people thought I just kind of just disappeared and just dropped off the face of the earth. They didn't know. I mean, that's not something I'm proud of. It's a deep, shameful place for me to say, yeah, while you guys were graduating, I was locked up and wearing literally clothes that were given to me, including bra and underwear that weren't even my own, that were assigned to me. Literally had guards around me at all times. I mean, it was the worst experience of my life to be locked up and incarcerated. My friends are all graduating, getting ready to go off for, beach week and summer trips and get ready to go to college. And I'm literally sitting in jail. And so it's not something I talk about, but I thought, all right, I'm going to go ahead and share it. And when I shared it, what the feedback I got from people, and I wanted to share it for a really just a deep place of letting people know we all have wounds. And not to try to sell anything, but to tell people your wounds matter, but you can heal them, because nobody would have bet on me is what I said. And what I named in that post was that I want people to hear, and I want you to hear as you're listening today, that I would bet on you. I would bet on you because I know what it's like when nobody bets on me. And that place of hopelessness and that place of despair, in all logical senses, if you lined everything up in that moment 31 years ago, you would have said there's no chance in hell this person's going to make it. And if they do, they'll probably end up in a trailer park somewhere with, multiple children and on welfare for the rest of their life. And that's literally, I didn't even know that I would have dreamed that that was possible. I literally had no dreams. And so when I look at that, and I think about this work and the liberation and the freedom that it's given me. Yes, it's a work of rewiring belief systems, but you get what you believe. And it is possible to go from that to whatever you could put your mind to within reason. We have to love our limits. My dream wasn't to become a multi-million-dollar NBA basketball star. That obviously would have taken me outside of my limits. But what was within my limits for dreaming was I wanted, as I started doing this work and people started showing up and I got through all that crap and I cleaned my life up and I took the next step and the next step. It does take time, but you do have to be easy with this. But that whole point of that story was to help you all understand. And it was funny because my boyfriend called me this morning and he goes, babe, you have criminal charges against you? And I was like, well, yeah, maybe a few. But they got dropped because I ended up going into the Army. If you read my book, this is the part we're in, where I went into the military to get out of all that mess. Totally went the other direction. There's a whole story about that. But I said, yeah, I do, but they were juvenile. I was just turning 18. They were all dropped. I don't have a criminal record. But I do have a GED. And I worked my way all the way up to an executive MBA and then have traveled the world as an executive coach and consultant for Fortune 10 companies. Who would have thought? I certainly didn't think that. So the point is, don't get so far ahead of yourself that you are not enjoying the moment of healing and the moment of growth and transformation that's happening right here, right now, as you listen to these words. So yes, you do your work, but I don't want you to get so addicted to doing the work that you don't enjoy the moment you're in and you don't enjoy the life that you're living right here, right now. And that's really where mindfulness comes in. And that's where that kind of kindness and compassion comes in. And I told you on every episode, I'm going to give you 3 things. We're going to educate, we're going to empower, we're going to entertain a little bit. And so this educational piece that we're going into today about the 4 choices that matter is going to be really helpful because it obviously helped me and it helps lots of other people. But the other part that was really cool from an empowerment point of view from my story is I literally, in the past 24 hours, from that post, from my dad's text to me, but also from conversations I've had with other people in that vulnerability and transparency. I had a guy call me this morning who I'd done work with a couple of years ago, and then during COVID, everybody kind of lost touch with some of the one-on-one in-person stuff. And he called and he said, just when he answered the phone, or when he called me and I answered, actually, I could hear his voice was different. And I said, oh my gosh, you sound incredible. And he said, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you because you didn't give up on me. And I'm not going to tell the guy's story. Maybe one day we'll have him come in here and tell his story. But if you think the story that you've read about me in the book or the little things you've heard about me were traumatic, I promise you, I hear a lot of stories from a lot of clients. And I know one thing, there's a lot of trauma and there's a lot of wounding out there in the world. And I would not trade any of my wounds for anyone else's, because I hear some stuff that I walk away and I just shake my head and I just imagine, what would it be like to walk in those shoes and to live in that story and to have to carry that shadow of that trauma. And this person experienced massive, major trauma as a child. And so we did some narrative coaching, we did some mindfulness work together. And to the point that even the mindfulness in the sitting practice with this gentleman, we ended up doing it one-on-one, because in a group setting, it was not fun. Sometimes it wasn't enjoyable. And socially, there was some awkwardness. But I didn't give up on him, because I saw the humanity that was inside of him. And he called and he said, I want you to know, COVID was an incredible gift to me. It forced me to shut up and sit, to let go of my dependencies, to let go of the story, to let go of the shadows, to let go of the trauma, to dig deep into this work that you're talking about. And he said, I'm now running a 501c3, helping other people free themselves from mental health issues. And he just started telling me all these amazing things that were coming. And the truth is, his healing and his power and his wisdom came from within him. It wasn't about this work that is the only, if you don't do this work in this way, I'm not saying that you won't get healing. You have an innate wisdom, but it's the belief of healing and wisdom that a lot of us are not patterned with. We're patterned with trauma and we're patterned with wounding, and we don't know there's other ways. So the whole point of this book and this chapter is it's not about attacking all these limiting beliefs and getting the right beliefs. It's just shutting up and sitting down and going, what am I believing? What stories were given to me? When people hurt other people, we usually assume and take on the shadow of our abusers. And this gentleman finally said, I am free from that shadow. I'm free from those people who hurt me. I now know who I am, and I wake up every day and I'm connected to me. And that's really the point of this whole work when we are talking about belief systems is, do you have and have you cultivated a belief system to connect back to the truth of who you are? Because wounds cause our ego, remember this, to separate us from ourselves and from everyone else. And it buys into a lie, aka an illusion, that we have to stay separate. We can never connect really with anybody because they're going to hurt us. And so this part of this conversation of going into these 4 choices that I mentioned that matter, because once you wake up, you realize what you're thinking, feeling, behaving, and you realize the beliefs that you're holding. And now you say, I'd like to try on new belief systems. We don't want to overwhelm the ego and give it the job of recovering all of the unhealthy belief systems, because that just takes your ego back into the equation in a not so productive way, because he or she will get overwhelmed and you'll just go back into the whole cycle again. What we do is we invite the ego into, with a loving kind, very much like we're parenting a small child. And we're talking to that part of ourselves and inviting it to sit down and asking it what it needs. And okay, you believe that, you don't matter because this person did this thing to you, but can I give you the voice of another story? And that's the voice you find in the silence. What would be another story that you could tell yourself? Because we do move into these 4 choices that matter. And I want to tell you what those 4 choices are, but I really wanted to hit home today. When people reach out to me and they talk about how this work has changed their life, I don't hear how I have changed their life. I hear how I changed my life. And this work is now, if it speaks to you, it is educating, empowering, and with a little bit of entertainment, hopefully, inviting you into a space of changing your life. That's how this work works. So I want to be really clear about that. And then as we start to pull these stories up, and we get into mindfulness and we start realizing that we can create some space. Now, I know in the beginning, when we've pulled these and we kind of unearthed these belief systems, and I've got it written in the book, and as always when I'm talking to you, I kind of look at where we're at and what I wrote. And, we talked already about brain waves and got to get into repetition and theta brain waves and the ways to change a belief. There's 4 ways. And sometimes when we first shut up and sit, it can be a little just uncomfortable. It can be a little bit painful. We're not really enjoying the process of shutting up and sitting down and actually facing our suffering. It's painful sometimes to go back and remember the shit people did to us that hurt us, that didn't feel good. But here's the thing about mindfulness, and I saw a show yesterday, actually too, online that was this beautiful woman. I mean, model, gorgeous woman, social media ad, Harvard graduate, works with people at Google. And here's the 5 things. If you do these 5 things in meditation, you'll find success and empowerment and all these things. And it was really interesting to me because I thought, well, the art of mindfulness and the work of mindfulness isn't to just get your ego addicted to the 5 things it needs to do to create success, because that means you've never really sat and faced the suffering or the shadow. That's where all the work is. So it has to be ugly. It has to be unattractive. And I literally have clients like the one that called me. We might spend 5 or 10 minutes just barely leaning in and touching that suffering and then pulling him back out. Leaning in and touching it and then pulling back out. Because what we're using mindfulness for here is to cultivate the ability to be with all of life. Not just the good stuff, not just the successful stuff, not just the corporate, rubbing the rocks and crystals and saying, well, if I do these 5 things, I too will become a millionaire. That is not what I'm talking about. If you want to become a millionaire, that's great. But this is not the work that says we're going to build a belief system to make you a millionaire. You do the work to go all the way at the core first to figure out what's in my unconscious that could be holding me back. People who get success, I mentioned this on the last show, they just hold belief systems that allowed them to show up in the world in a way that created success. But if you're somebody that's suffering from some type of wound or some type of trauma, which, hey, by the way, up to 90% of the population is dealing with some type of wounding. I just want you guys to hear that. Up to 90%. Just like me making that post on social media, people are like, I had no idea. I thought you just always had your shit together because as an adult, you've always put this face out in the world that everything's great. Well, yeah, there's some vulnerability there of going into and saying, I wasn't always great. I had to figure it out. I had to turn rocks over. I had to sit at the feet of masters. I had to learn how to finally shut up and go inside myself and say, who am I? What is it about my suffering? And it's so interesting that my stepfather was the one that sent me that photo. Because if you've read the book, and maybe I'll have him come in on the show. It hasn't really been kind of on the forefront of my mind to do that. But if you read the book, and if I did have my dad here, he would tell you, he adopted me when I was 5. Life was rough. I had a biological father who was in and out of the picture all the time. I was a really confused child. I had a lot of genetic stuff that just made me difficult to deal with. My dad had PTSD from being in Vietnam. We didn't talk about that as a kid growing up in the late 70s. It wasn't the normal conversation in our home. And so we ended up displacing a lot of our own wounding, if you will, and our own shit literally on each other. And my father was a very, very, very violent disciplinarian man in our household. But as an adult looking back now, I understand why. I didn't know as a kid. I'm sure he didn't know. We didn't have words for stuff like post-traumatic stress disorder then. And if we did, it wasn't a socially acceptable thing to admit. Mental hellness. There's a word. Robin's like, there's a good word, a mental hellness. Freudian slip, but mental wellness. But really for my dad, it was mental hellness. He lived in a hell in his mind that we didn't have resources for. And it was a stigma in the 70s and 80s. People didn't walk around talking about that kind of stuff. Our veterans, we could do a whole episode on our veterans and how disserviced they really are in the mental health capacity to go to war and then just come back and pick up their life or start a life. Like there's no bridge. There's no, it's an issue. Okay. So there's so much there, but I look at the wounding that my father and I both on each other. And then I watch how we spent the day together yesterday, and it was beautiful. And we've healed that relationship. But there's a lot of wounding there that has turned into wisdom for me. And so this book and this work, eventually you do get to the point where you can get enough space from leaning into the suffering and pulling back and leaning in and pulling back that you can start to really meet the needs of that wounded part of yourself. And so when that little girl that got wounded, it comes up for me, I talk to her all the time and I take care of her. I don't put that burden on anyone else anymore. So I had to learn a belief system of taking the wound and going, well, I'm a wise, healthy, mature adult now. I've been doing this work. So I shut up and sit down and I go within and I go, what do I need? Instead of asking and forcing other people to meet needs for me that they probably can't even meet for themselves, much less anyone else. So just want you to think about that for a second. And that piece of that story was just kind of really fresh with me. And I think about this too with my stepdad because, my biological father, and you guys have read some of this and heard some in the show. But Sunday was Father's Day. And I love when the silence comes. And at the end of the day, on Father's Day, I was at home and I had been, out with my boyfriend and his family, and we just had some fun out on the river. And I came home and I was just at the house and I went, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And that's how the silence works. And I just heard, go to my dad's grave. I hadn't been there in 15 years. And I thought, oh, that's the last thing I want to do is go to my dad's grave on Father's Day. Like, God, what an awful place to go back to some demons. But that's what mindfulness says. You're safe. You have the capacity to walk back into and sit with some of the grief and the loss and the suffering. So what I decided to do on Father's Day, which I think this is so interesting, is I just had an ice cold beer. I'm not a beer drinker. And this is probably how it all started throughout the day, that my boyfriend and his family, they're drinking Miller Lite. My dad loved Miller Lite. And so I just heard, take that beer, we had a few left in the cooler, and go and sit and drink a beer at his grave. And so I'm driving there, and I just knew this song by Luke Bryan, Have a Beer. And I'm like singing this country song. I finally turned it on the radio. And so I go to the grave and I literally sit there. I take my little phone and I play the video, Have a Beer by Luke Bryan at the graveside. People were everywhere. And I'm sure they were looking around going, what is this woman doing? Playing country music. I mean, I downed that beer. It was the best beer. It was ice cold. And it's following that silence and that wisdom and that knowingness. And the next thing that I was led to in this moment, and this is why I want you to hear mindfulness, you'll hear whisperings, you'll hear ideas, you'll hear inspirational, and oh, that's interesting. So it's following that flow of surrender that another thought is trying to be born and created in those gaps of the thought you're holding on to. And so as I was sitting there at the grave, and the sunset was gorgeous, the weather was beautiful, and I'm just looking at, a sea of thousands of headstones, and I'm thinking, this is where it all ends. And I remember being at that graveside, and it was probably almost 31 years ago to the day that my father had died. And so I was sitting there and I was listening to this song, and the weirdest, I say weirdest because this was not my mind. Again, the inspiration of the thought comes up. And literally, I just heard, just lay down on the grave. I literally laid on the grave with my hands across my chest in the same position that my father was in the last time I saw him, in the coffin. And I laid there and I just looked up at the sky. And I just felt the breeze, and I thought, man, what kind of power death can teach us to be literally in that same position and think about my father, but to be able to be with all those thoughts, feelings, and emotions, not to make this morbid, but my mindfulness practice has brought me to a place where I'm not afraid anymore to sit with the big questions. What happens if? Nobody knows when. Literally laying there, and I could just feel all the weight of the shit that I'd been holding and carrying just kind of drop down into the soil. And I had the most peaceful, meditative experience just looking up at the sky, watching the clouds go by. Of course, I had just shotgunned a beer and was listening to country music, so that might have helped a little bit. But here's my point. When we get into rewiring belief systems, if you don't know what it's like to believe that you're enough, you're worthy, you're lovable, the list could go on, you're not gonna grab onto the things that most people do. Remember that document I walked you all through? So when the inspirational thoughts come or the ideas say, turn left on this street instead of right, get up and go to the graveside, drink a beer. The entire universe, all of existence is trying to communicate to us in our own healing. It's not found in one particular book or in one seminar. Life itself is trying to call you and lead you into new belief systems. So listen to that. And that's the power of silence, is that still kind of space. Every time I listen to it, it does not let me down. If anything, it takes me into a better place than I ever could have been before. So when I was driving home from the grave, that was kind of my end of my Father's Day, and I spent the day yesterday with my stepfather, my mom's current husband, Pop. I've had 3 fathers in my life. Spent time with him on Friday, and all of those relationships have taught me different things about myself. But the truth is, when we start to rewire belief systems and we get into the space of mindfulness, in the beginning, it doesn't always feel good, but you lean in and you lean back. You lean in and you lean back. It's taken me 31 years. And for the past 10, I've been kind of at it like fighting rattlesnakes, like my mom would say. So, this is a process. It is a new way of living, a new way of life to show up with your new belief systems. It's not a course that you check off. It's not a check that you cash. It is literally an ongoing way of showing up and living and doing life and doing this work. So I want to just really reiterate to you all, as you move into the rewiring of your belief system, make that a way of life. To just ask, what am I thinking, feeling, behaving? What is this belief system that's at play? Where could I learn more about it? Is it something I want to hold on to? Would I like to acquire a new one? Because the truth is, you never get rid of the belief system in the sense that it is like transmuted and it's as if it never happened. That story and those experiences are there and the belief is there. But with mindfulness, there's something called both and. We learn to be both with the suffering of the past and the wound and with the wisdom and the healing of the present moment. And we stay awake, aware, and available to choose. Am I going to go back into that past experience and pick at the scab and the wound? Or am I going to go further into the healing and put some balm on that scar and really help that healing process to continue? And when we do it for ourselves, it also helps us to help other people do it for them. And that's why I think for years I really struggled with social media, but then I thought, no, I'm going to start using it to share healing and to share words of encouragement and empowerment and entertainment in a way that people realize this work doesn't have to be miserable. It doesn't have to be arduous. It doesn't have to be expensive. Healing is available to all of us. And so the 4 choices that matter when we start to really consciously step into healing. And this is the first one that I discovered. The decision to live a life of integrity. Now, that was a word I would have never used because while it was funny when Jeff called this morning, he's like, babe, so you got, we're talking like theft, homicide, like, and I'm like, no. Drugs, alcohol, that kind of stuff. And he goes, oh, okay. But the word integrity was not something that I was raised with. Now, I will tell you, my stepfather, integrity was a real one for him. Being in the Marines, his belief system, integrity was real for him. But he just inherited a small child that was 5 years old who came from the exact opposite of integrity, deceit, despair, dysfunction. I mean, that was a way of life for me. By the time he got me at 5, I was already patterned with some stuff that was just in my DNA. And so I really had to ask myself, and I was married for 20 years to somebody who was also in the military, and integrity was a huge value. I was and am drawn to people who walk a life and live a life of integrity, but I realized I was living vicariously through them. So here's what I realized. When we make a decision to live a life of integrity, we walk the way we talk. So it's not one thing's coming out of my mouth and I'm doing something else in the shadows. That was a part I had to really bring into the light of day. I'm going to walk the way I talk. Even as a teacher with you all here, I am not perfect. It's not permanent. It's not personal. I bring all that up all the time. I am a human being with all of my hopes, dreams, fears, challenges, just like you are. But I am not at some level of enlightenment. And the truth is, if you hear someone say, I've reached enlightenment, it is an absolute lie. That's their ego, okay? Because people who've reached enlightenment don't tell you they've reached enlightenment. They just walk in the room and they already are enlightenment. And if you literally think about walking the way that you talk, I do think it's important to have integrity. If you're going to say, be mindful, shut up, sit down, practice, cultivate silence, yes, do that. But if you realize and you're listening to me, you don't hear me tell you some legalistic, ritualistic, you got to figure out what your walk and what your talk is. And that's the unconscious aspects of limiting belief. If the way you're walking is not in alignment with the way you're talking or vice versa, that means something inside of you is unconsciously holding you back. It was built to protect you. You know that now. But now we don't need it to protect us. And we want to bring it up into awareness and say, you know what? And I'm very aware, I'm very careful of this too, not to proclaim something that I am not demonstrating. Proclamation and demonstration, and it causes a lot of issues in our world. We see leaders who make proclamations all day long, and then in the shadows, they get busted for all kinds of shit that they're demonstrating that is not in alignment. The world is saying, we don't want leaders and we don't want people like that anymore. And the truth is, I didn't want to be that person anymore. So when we decide to live a life of integrity, we walk the way we talk. We do not betray or compromise ourselves. And that was one thing I had to really dig into was how much do I betray myself when I say yes to somebody else, which means I'm saying no to myself. And being able to really be in alignment with taking care of myself. The ego softens when it realizes that this integrated whole aspect of yourself comes in and says in a loving way, no thanks, not today. I'm not going to do that to myself or to someone else today. I didn't learn these patterns of behavior, and so I had to step into them. How about this one? This still falls under the life of integrity. Do not force another person to please you. I love that I'm in a relationship now that nothing about the relationship, and this is my aspiration, not just personally, but professionally, is nobody is there to please me. I am here to please me by doing things that bring me joy and love and kindness and forgiveness and compassion and all these words I use now. It's not your responsibility. It's not anyone else, the people walking by. It's not my partner. It's not even my client's responsibility. It's my responsibility to make me feel good about me. And that might mean on a Friday night, I decide I just want to stay home and watch PBS and take a bubble bath and enjoy just some quality time, just being relaxed and calm with me. And actually, that is what I do sometimes. And Jeff sometimes makes fun of me. But that's my life on a Friday night because that's what brings me joy. But when I deny myself to then go do something to make someone else happy, or I make them make me happy when and then that means I'm making them deny themselves, all that does is bring ego back into the equation. The other part of this first one is do not hold others captive for your pleasure. This is kind of following in that same vein, meaning it's nobody else's job to entertain you. If you can't find joy in shutting up and sitting down and being present in the silent, still aspects of your own human capacity and human beingness, guess what? Nobody else is going to really find joy in your presence either. So wouldn't it be really cool if you could just be the joy and the pleasure just in your presence alone, than having to go in and make people laugh or dress a certain way, or, who cares about all that stuff? And then the last part of this decision to live a life of integrity, and this was a huge one for me, was do not lie, speak and tell the truth. Now, you've heard me say this on the show before. I'm not going to get into the dogma of beliefs. Literally are interpretations of truths, okay? So when someone comes to me and says the truth is, what I hear is that's their interpretation of the data and that's their perspective of climbing that ladder of inference. And the truth is there is no absolute truth because we're all egoistic human beings looking at the data from our own limited perspective, our own core components of being human. And so you believe it's your truth, but it's literally your perspective. And so people will come together in groups to try to get a collaborative kind of energy or vibrational field of selective truths to try to create a new truth in which to lay their meaning making or their ego's head on so that they can feel like they have some sense of stability. So not lying. When I say tell the truth, I don't mean what your interpretation of the data is. We're talking about basic core honesty, which is not lying to people. And that's a big one for human beings. I know for me, some pattern around deceit was definitely given to me by my parents, by the caregivers I had. That was how we survived. So now as an adult, I'm really, really, really in tune with what integrity means. And in my book, I spell these out. But, being in a place of, I don't want to lie because I don't want to put that energy out in the world of deceit anymore. And even if my sister's like, hey, do you think this outfit, looks good on me? What I now tell people is I don't even give them advice. I go, well, what do you think? And she'll look in the mirror and go, I'm like, great. It doesn't matter what I think. Now, when it comes to, because I know that's how a lot of us get caught up in line, we're like, oh yeah, you look great, knowing that they don't. I don't even enter into that conversation anymore. A life of integrity for me is if someone asks me to do something, I don't lie and say, sure, I'll be there, I can do it, and then not show up and sideways around it and then, and lie, I totally forgot. And I know what that life was like. The division in my soul of not being able to speak the truth of who I am, which is I'd love to say yes, but I don't know if I have time for that tomorrow. So can we just hold that as a possibility? So you learn when you start to rewire new belief systems to make different choices that matter. And that was the first one, was this life of integrity that was so, so important that I had seen in other people, but I had to start doing these. And you're probably like, why are there bullet points under that? I literally had to sit down and design what would a life of integrity look like. And you're free to add to any of these 4 choices, whatever subsets you need to. I just started looking at the human condition. What is integrity? What type of patterns, behaviors, ways of showing up, habits do I need to participate in? Do we as a society need to participate in to live a life of integrity? Which then moved me into step number 2. This one was huge. I had never heard of it put this way. And it says, the decision to pass wisdom on, not suffering. And I want to read that one again. The decision to pass wisdom on and not suffering. because we are passing everything on in our family, friends, relationships, personally, professionally, who we are, the thoughts, the words, the deeds. That's how we create, right? Thought, word, deed is the process of creating. We pass it on. Our thoughts have energy that go out in the world. Our words have energy. We can just get into quantum physics. The sound of sound alone. Did you know that sound never ends? Think about that. In a massive universe, sound reverberates forever. Every word you say, every musical note, every sound that's played, it goes on forever. So what you're saying is actually out there being passed on. And then, and then we can get literally into generational suffering. A lot of people, when I was early on in my health coaching days, they were like, oh, my family, and, it's just the way my mom was, and my mom's mom was that way. Because it's a patterned behavior. Let's be honest. It's a patterned behavior that somebody passed on to you. And you get to choose, is this something I want to continue to pass on to others? And I brought you guys a picture today because as we're talking about these 4 points, I brought this picture of my son, and I'm going to hold this up, and Robin's jumping up. He's like, oh, I got to zoom in on this. So this is my beautiful baby boy, and he's going to be 24 next month. But I brought this picture because this is when I look at my son, and I remember when he was born. And I looked at this joy. I just can't stand it. He's the cutest. He was the chunkiest, fattest little baby, and I loved it. And I looked at this little baby, and I looked at his joy, and I thought, man, I don't want to pass all this shit on to him that got passed on to me. And I didn't want to be in the victim mindset where I stayed in the space that, oh, poor me, nobody did what they should have for me as a kid. My parents did the best they could with the level of awareness they were at. I get that now. That's what mindfulness, shutting up and sitting, has taught me. But when I looked at this baby, I thought, okay, all right. So this was something that spurred me on to not pass on suffering. I wanted to pass on wisdom. And so in a minute, I'll leave this here so you can see him, but in a minute, I'll talk to you about why, how and why we can use images for mindfulness practices as we close today. I'll go into that with the loving kindness practice. But the decision not to pass on the suffering, but to pass on wisdom. All right, so identifying the gifts that you've learned from your suffering. You've been hearing about that the whole time. Harvesting the wisdom from your story. You've been hearing me talk about that. Lose the victim mentality, the language, the energy. That's all the stuff we're talking about. You're learning how to do that in this book, which, by the way, we're putting all this on an online course. You're going to hear about that soon. And then don't let what happened defeat you. That's why I go back to the story and spent so much time on that today. You are not defeated by the patterns in the past that was given to you. You get to claim victory to be the victor, not the victim. But it takes conscious effort. It takes shutting up and sitting and looking at the shadows and confronting some of those people that hurt you, expanding your ability to be with the suffering, pulling back that window of awareness and saying, what else could I see here that my pain has been, and my shadow and the pain of the shadow has prevented me from seeing about these people in my life or about other things in my life. And so that moved me into point number 3, the decision to take risks. It's a risk. It's a risk every time you tell somebody the truth of who you are. It's a risk of showing up, practicing a new way of talking. It's a risk putting something, and I'm not saying go vomit all your life on social media. You got to balance out. People earn the right to hear your story. And the timing was right for me to share this story and this post and this image yesterday. But you know what? You do have to take a risk. It's not going to be fun in the beginning to turn right when the rest of the crowd is turning left, because you're going to think you're all alone. And it's tempting to want to go back to the way it was, because at least then you're not alone. But I'll tell you, the path to turn the other way, we might have less people on it, but there are people on the path, I promise you. And it's solo work that cannot be done alone. So the masses aren't jumping in on this right now. I do believe we're in a turning point in our world where they are going to start jumping in. But don't wait for proof. All right, that's one thing I have here. If you're going to wait for proof of what it's going to look like to live the life you always dreamed of, you take the risk and then the universe kind of catches you. That's what faith is. That's the way the magic of this works. Regret is just part of the change process. I want you guys to hear that. Regret is just part of the change process. Mindfulness is shutting up and sitting down and going, so what do I regret? As I laid there on my father's grave, I thought, I still have regrets. I miss a lot of things about him. Our last conversation was not a kind conversation, but I just dropped literally and figuratively just dropped that regret, because the truth is it's just part of the process. You face some stuff that you weren't proud of, that you didn't do a good job at, but you don't let that stop you. You ignore the doubt, the fear, the confusion. We've talked about that along the way in the work. The next piece we're still under number 3 says, ask yourself how many of your greatest fears have happened. And ultimately, as I laid there on that grave, I thought my greatest fear is death. And I thought, what if I laid here and literally embodied as close as I could the experience of the death of my father? And how could that inspire and motivate me instead of live in fear from wanting to avoid even ever having to face it? And then the last couple of points on number 3, most of the best things that happen have nothing to do with you. And you're probably going, what do you mean about that? Because there is this intelligence in the whole universe. It's not about you. Your ego wants to make it all about you. The moments of magic that I have when I tell those short stories and I share them, guess what? You have them. People walking by on the street have them. Robin has it. We all have these magical moments, but we have to wake up and pay attention to them. I'm not a privileged one. Every human being is tapped into the magic of existence, of life, of the universe. Every one of us, or we wouldn't be here. So it's not about, it only happens to certain people. It happens to all of us, you included. Just open your eyes and look around. It's all around you. If you don't know what a miracle looks like, look in the mirror. The fact that you're alive and you're breathing, the gift of life is a miracle. And then the other 2 points I have here on point number 3, don't look back for guidance. Don't take the safe path. You've heard me say that a lot. But when I say don't look back, when I sat there on my father's grave, I thought, there's a reason I haven't been here in 15 years, and I don't know when I'll come back. But I don't live my life in the past. There was a healing that I was feeling I was called towards for whatever reason, to be there with him and to release that last or whatever piece that was kind of in me, that was kind of coming up into conscious awareness on Sunday. But looking back, and it was so interesting because as I laid there, I thought 3 things. I thought, that's the best damn beer I've ever had. God, that was good. The second one was, don't live your life constantly looking for the answers to all the questions. Just live the questions. Because the universe, existence brings you exactly what you need, when you need it, how you need it, if you believe that. Cultivate that belief. And then the third thing I heard was, get up, I'm not done with you. And I just stood right up and I thought, I'm not going to live in the past. I'm not going to take the safe path. Maybe 10 people benefit from what I'm doing instead of 10 million. But those are 10 beautiful people who healed from something that they probably never thought was possible. And then the last one on number 3, it says, be in what I call newness. You are where you are because the other part of your life is over. So it's interesting that grief's kind of coming up today in the conversation, but the truth is when we let go of an old way of being, there is a dying process. And when I mean dying, the death of the ego isn't to kill it. But grief is a process of releasing, of letting go of what could have been, what will never be, all the expectations and ideas. I think of all the grief I had. My son never got to meet my dad. My dad never. I thought about this. God, if he walked in here today, what would he think about me? If he hung out with me yesterday like my dad who raised me, what would he say? What would he do? And so the truth is, when we think about it, I don't know the answers to those questions. I'll never know them. That part of my life is over. I carry, and I said this in the post, sometimes grief carries me and sometimes I carry it. So there's a grieving when we let go of a belief system, even if it was limiting. And you're going to want to run back and cling to it and get a little distracted and pick it back up every now and then, and that's okay. Mindfulness, shutting up and sitting, and cultivating compassion for ourselves says, oh, look at me wanting to run back and pick that up. Oh, that's interesting. So we stop judging ourselves and we just realize it's just a grief process. Just like if you were to lose a loved one or lose something in your life, we kind of go back and fantasize and we might pick it back up, or we might try to imagine, remember when. We do the same with our own belief systems. So be easy about the process of letting go and releasing the grief as you begin to take the risk. And then the last point here for the 4 choices that matter now in this work going forward is the decision to choose a new vocabulary. And that one is really, really powerful. Why is that? Because words create your reality. You just heard what I said. Thoughts come first. Thoughts turn into words, which come out into the world, and words literally create. When I talk to you right now, I'm creating an awareness, a reality for you as you listen. When you talk to people the rest of today, you're going to get them to do things for you or get needs met or create business ideas or make things happen for family and friends and community. Our words are radically important. And in narrative coaching, they're radically important because of the stories that we use, that the words are used to tell the story. So am I telling the story of the 31 years ago, the girl that I was? No, I don't tell her story anymore. Do I revisit it like in the post just to gain some perspective and go, wow, absolutely. But I tell the story differently now to myself in my head. And it was a little surreal. I had to sit there and look at that picture of that girl and I'm like, whoo, honey, if you ever wonder if things aren't going well for you today, go back and look at her because that is so far in my rearview mirror. I have compassion for her, but I looked at her and I thought, I don't even know her because I am in a different place and I am in a different story now. And then the second part of step number 4 is what words do you need to remove forever from your narrative? And I had to come up with a list of those. Some of those were really self-defeating, negative things I would say to myself and other people. I'm pretty sure my mom would say, do you think maybe you could drop the F-bomb? Maybe, I don't know, but it's just so much fun to say. And I actually did research on this. Did you know the F sound is the most neurologically pleasing in the body, the way that the brain and the muscles and mouth work, the F sound. So it actually is, there's a biological reason. I tried to convince my mom of it, but I'm not sure she's quite there yet. But what words need to leave? What phrases need to leave your life forever? Make a list of them. You know, one of mine was I can't do that. I got rid of I can't. I got rid of all the problem language, all the negative, all the victim language. And so in narrative coaching, that's what I help clients with. But I want you to make a list. What are the phrases? What are the words that when you say them, you keep the old story alive? Remember when? Oh gosh, I sure do miss. Doesn't mean you can't be in that place, but if you're constantly telling a story of what was, as opposed to turning and talking about what could be or what will be, you know, that's going to change the entire experience that you're having. And then number 3, we've talked a lot about quantum energy and healing, but the vibration of certain words can be so toxic that when you use them to talk negatively, it actually prevents healing. Now, in this chapter, we didn't get into a lot of this, but we talked earlier, and Robin and I were on an episode talking about sound. And we talked about Emoto and this Japanese researcher, it's all in the book, that the vibration of sound actually impacts everything. And there was research done on sound and water. Dr. Emoto is in Japan. Fascinating research. And basically, negative language, negative thoughts, negative toxic environments actually cause the cells in your body, the water in them, and the cells to actually be distorted and even get to a point where they could reach death. So there is power in vocabulary. Now, once you make that list of the words that are banned from your vocabulary forever, like I deserve or I'm entitled or just really toxic language, here's where we move into, and I want to take you into some loving kindness as we begin to pull all this together. It isn't judging yourself and going, I'm never going to talk that way again because that's such a bad person. Self-judgment comes from a lack of self-love. And so when I talked about this picture of my beautiful son, when I talked about this picture of me 31 years ago and all this work I'm doing and why I show up every day and shut up and sit and talk to you all, it's because this whole space is to cultivate loving myself so that I can love others. You don't love others first really well without loving yourself. And I'm not talking about ego love. I'm talking about looking at yourself. When I look at this picture of my son and I think of how much I love him and I feel that love for him, I had to ask myself, have I ever looked in the mirror and felt that love for me? Because I've overgiven a lot in my life to my son. I've tried to make up for a lot of stuff that didn't happen to me that I wanted to happen for him. So the deeper part of this work, and this is where the kindness and compassion practice comes in, which is one of my favorite forms of meditation, is finding an image of yourself first. You can move it to other people. You can find an image of yourself. You can find someone else that you love. You can even find someone that you're having a hard time loving. But you find different images and you can hold those images literally in your hand, or you can look at them and close your eyes, or just hold the memory, the image of them in your mind if you want. But the practice of shutting up and sitting and saying, okay, I've made a life. I want to live a life of integrity. I want to pass on wisdom, not suffering. I'm deciding to take some risk here, and I'm deciding to choose a new way of talking to myself and others. The loving kindness compassion practice, you can just Google it. There is a loving kindness. It's called metta meditation, M-E-T-T-A, metta. But there is a practice where you go within and you talk to yourself in language that says, may I be loving kindness. May I be compassion. May I be love. And then you bring to mind someone that you love deeply. May this person, for my son, may Brian Keith be loving kindness. May he be compassion. May he be joy. May he live with ease. And then you move your thoughts to a wider circle. It could be somebody that you're having a hard time loving. Because we set the intention to start with the love inside of us and then connect to the love outside of us, and then see if we can't invite ourselves to expand that love just a little bit further out to the people that we're having a harder time to love. It could be a person, a group, an organization. And so when we do this and we get up every day and we decide to make these choices and we're holding all of life's experiences, a loving kindness meditation just gives you the capacity to be in the new belief system of loving kindness and compassion and joy, instead of complaining about the one you're trying to get out of and talking about where you really want to go. You've got to put yourself in that integrity, in that risk, in that place of going, I don't really know what loving kindness might look like or compassion, but I know if I start with thinking the thoughts and saying the words, that they will start to manifest and show up in my life. And so this is a practice. If you haven't figured out by now, our song on our intro and outro is called Kindness. It's by Ben Glover, an amazing musician, one of my I guess partners, really, if you say that, in my mindfulness meditation teacher certification program. And he wrote that song. It is literally the words to Loving Kindness Meditation, and he turned it into an acoustic song, and he sings it. It's beautiful. You can hear parts of it, like I said, on our show, but you can Google the full song, Kindness. And that's a way for you to start to cultivate and get into the new belief system. And so these choices that matter, they're important. I really wanted to spend some time today, and I know I went a little bit longer than I normally do when it's just me, but I wanted you to hear the story. I wanted you to really hear what people are out there saying and how this work works. And I just want you to hold all of it and be easy and know the healing is happening. The beliefs are letting go. The new ones are coming. And we're just giving you some framework and some guidance of how to just keep staying the course, keep showing up. My meditation teacher says you suit up, you show up, and then I added you shut up and you sit and you experience what it's like to really know who and what you really are at your deepest core. So much fun to talk to you all today, and thanks for hanging out and listening the entire time. And we're going to move out of the 4 choices that matter, and I've got my sheet here of where we're going on our next episode. Our next one is the 5 stages of ego recovery, which is a lot of fun. We get to have a little bit of fun now. We're going to bring the ego back in and tell him and her how they can make life a little bit interesting for us. So make sure you catch that next episode with us. And until then, remember, you matter simply because you exist, and the healing that you are seeking is happening right here, right now. I'll catch you on the next episode. Take care.
May you know goodness. May you know peace. May you know contentment. May you